Recent studies have discovered that as much as 40% of people are contemplating a career change in the next 12 months. After a year of the pandemic, many people have already left where they were without even finding a new position first. It's being called the Great Resignation. And the question is, what's the opportunity in it for you? Hi, I'm Steve Wershing, and on this episode of 30-Minute Money, we're talking with Patty Phillips, president of Clarity Recruiting and Career Management. Since 2010, she has worked as a retained executive recruiter in New York State. She's also designed a program for people in the first third of their careers, guiding them through weekly meetings and a series of exercises to pursue their path. We tap into Patty's considerable experience to discuss what kinds of preparations you should make if you're contemplating a change. What kinds of strategies work to locate and interview for a new position? What can you reasonably expect to negotiate? And what's all this fuss about video resumes? We talk about whether it makes more sense to stay where you are and negotiate a better opportunity with your existing employer. There's a lot in this episode that will really be useful for you. So let's get right to it. Here now is my conversation with Patty Phillips. Patty Phillips, welcome to Millennial Wealth. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Stephen.
So I wanted to have you on. I wanted to have this conversation because I've seen some studies and I've heard from other folks that suggest that as much as 40% of people may be looking for a job in the next 12 months. And I've heard the name of this movement thrown around, the Great Resignation. So tell me what you're seeing and tell me what's all about this.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing shades of that in my recruiting work and working with folks and helping them land positions that there's a lot of resignations happening. I'm seeing more on the other side from the employer's point of view, where they have jobs that they can't get filled. People aren't willing to take them. They're not willing to step into it. And a lot of that is at the lower end of the market, entry level positions. But everyone's feeling it. If you're trying to go to your favorite restaurant and finding out that, oh, sorry, we're not open for lunch, it's that they can't get staffing. So I'm seeing that even more than I am with people who are flat out resigning from jobs, but I absolutely know that it's happening. There's a lot that's being published on it. The statistics, though, they're a little bit worse than what you're saying, Stephen, in that in the best of times pre-COVID, level of engagement of employees with their employers is abysmally low. A more recent Gallup study, it's like 67% of employees report themselves to be disengaged from their work. They aren't focused on it. It's not on their mind. They're not looking for efficient and better ways to do things. They're thinking about what else could I possibly be doing.
Okay, well, and that would make sense. That would be congruent with the stuff that I'm hearing. Is it because we've all been on Zoom for a year, or what do you suppose this is coming from?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things, and it really depends on where you are as an individual in your life and where you are on that wealth continuum in your life. So even at that low end of folks with a high school education that might be working in hotels and restaurants and such, they have had the opportunity to be home, connect with family. They may actually have added to their coffers with unemployment checks, stimulus checks, saving money by not, going out and buying lunch, gas money, all of those things. So some folks are in a position where they've built up a little bit and are feeling safe. They're feeling safe enough. I know I'll find something. I got 3-4 months cushion here. I'm not going back to that world that I was in.
Yeah.
And I'm finding people at the other end of the spectrum, Stephen, that they're more advanced in their careers. They were putting in pools. They were fixing up their houses because they were also saving money while they were continuing to work from home. And they are finding themselves unwilling to go back to the same employment contract, if you will, that they've had with their employer. They want to stay remote if possible.
Yeah. So, our audience is more millennial professionals, so more on that upper end. And so let's talk about that. I mean, if somebody is feeling like that, if they're feeling less engaged with their employer, if they kind of like having more time around the family and around home, is this a good time to be changing jobs?
So it's like being an early adopter with change. If you have caught this cycle early enough and you've made that decision and you're out there looking, it is definitely an employee market. So that there are positions open as the world has opened back up post-COVID, and these supply chains are finally coming back. You've got all sorts of backlogs of needs. So, companies can't get people back fast enough, right? So if you're unhappy in position A, they want you to come back to work. If you were early on this, you very well could have found and landed something, maybe without too much trouble, because employer B is willing to stay flexible, allow you to have a more flexible work schedule, for example. My fear, Stephen, is as this continues, and statistics show that people like to do things like resign from a position when they see their friends doing it. So if you're a little bit later in that bandwagon, there's an increasing competition for the same roles. Everybody wants that.
Okay, sure.
There's only going to be so many of them.
So what kind of time frame are we looking at? So we'll probably be publishing this around October. If somebody's thinking about doing this, I mean, what kind of time frame should they keep in mind?
Yeah, so it's of course going to be very dependent on the type of work the individual does, what kind of function, what kind of industry that they're in. But for positions that can very easily flex to home, but the employer wants folks to come back, I think you're going to be kind of cycling through the people making those changes really over the next 2 or 3 months.
Oh, okay.
Into that, I don't have that crystal ball, right? But
Right,
between now and year end, let's say, and
okay.
then it could get increasingly difficult after that.
Okay, interesting. So, one friend of mine runs a computer company, a programming company. They do websites and things, and they're getting a lot of competition from California firms who are paying California wages to attract away people who are here in New York, or in Rochester, which is a much lower cost of income. Do you see anything like that happening? Do you see any of those kinds of things going on in this area?
Yeah, that's even pre-COVID and pre-everything that you and I are talking about right now, that's always been an issue. You can pull away some of the best people in more robust markets and in organizations that everybody wants to work for. It's really sexy to be able to say that you work for Amazon, or you work for Microsoft or Google and so on. It's not so sexy to work for Joe Schmo manufacturer who also has software development needs. And so, that individual's definitely got to fight harder to find the talented individual to join his or her ranks. And, they can only stretch as much as their budget's going to let them stretch to try to find the right people. I believe in perfect markets, as you probably do, right? So, the salaries offered will go up to a certain point that equilibrium is again regained.
Yeah. So you talked about having a fairly narrow window, and some people would like a little different situation, but they don't necessarily want to go through the upheaval of actually changing jobs. If you're thinking that way, are there things that you can do where you are to work with your employer for maybe a better situation? Or are there things you can negotiate?
Yeah, I love that question, because that is advice that I often get when I am helping somebody who is looking at changing employers, but they share that they actually like what they do. They like the industry they're in. They like the function that they're in. And so when you really scratch underneath the surface about what is the level of dissatisfaction then with where you are now, it's always people related. It's an issue with they might be feeling undervalued, issues with their manager. So that's always your first stop, is to have a conversation. And you might think that you have because you've made a remark here and there offhand. You need to actually schedule time, a sit-down conversation, and being very frank on the 1 or 2 very well thought out points you'd like to make about improvements, additional projects you're looking for, how you feel that you could be contributing more. And then you're going to feel a lot better about leaving, because you'll know that you've done everything you could to stay in your current situation.
Sure. So how would you start a conversation like that? I mean, I can see that going into your boss's office and starting a conversation like that could, get off on the wrong foot, or could make the boss feel threatened, or could feel like an ultimatum. How would you start a conversation like that?
Yeah, and you're hitting that on the head. It absolutely needs to not come across as an ultimatum. That might be your choice. You're going to vote with your feet if this doesn't improve to your satisfaction over a period of time, but it can't come across like that, because you're really putting someone in a corner, and that's never the best place for a negotiation. So opening a conversation like that to say something like, I've wanted to sit down and talk with you about a couple of issues. I really feel that I can be doing so much more for this organization than I am right now. There's a project that's come up that I think that I could really contribute in X, Y, and Z ways. And shame on me if I don't sit here and tell you that I think that I have a role in that. And I really want to stress how important it is to me that you consider that. And then you might move on to point two in the same type of frame.
Yeah.
So it's not a threat. You're talking about how you're adding value, looking for ways to add more value, and how important it is to you. And same thing on, I don't know if you're going to ask this, Stephen, if I'm cutting you off,
Sure.
Same thing on salary. If part of your dissatisfaction is compensation,
Yeah.
You can approach it in exactly the same way. Compensation negotiation, that's about leverage. So if you have a little bit of knowledge going into that meeting that you are being underpaid, and to go into that meeting to say, let's say we continue with my example I was just giving, the second issue that you might say I'd like to raise is my compensation. I very much like what I do. I like working here. But again, shame on me if I'm not letting you know that the phone has been ringing. I have declined meetings, but I'm getting to the point where I'm feeling uncomfortable doing that. I owe it to myself. I owe it to my family. So I would much rather stay here. And it would be important to me if you would take another look at the compensation I'm receiving, and then being very specific. I'm looking for X dollars more and a Y% raise. It would be important to me to see you and the organization consider that.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that kind of thing would go for working conditions or whatever other dissatisfactions you may have with where you are now.
That's right. I identify them, number them. You hear in my example, I'm using numbers. It helps the listener hear that you have 3 issues or 2 issues. A lot of times that's when you see the pen and paper come out. They're hearing it in a certain way that they're going to be able to repeat it, because they're probably going to need to. There's probably other people that are involved in whatever this decision might be. So to come across as a very clear-headed thinker with your 1, 2, 3 issues, it also lets the listener know that it isn't one of these, there's going to be a scroll paper that rolls all over the floor.
Right.
There's 75 issues, right?
Right.
So say, I have 3 issues I'd like to go over with you today. Number 1, number 2, number 3.
Yeah, and I could see that. I could see that being important advice for someone, because someone who's really dissatisfied where they are, but they want to work it out. Having this long list of grievances that you don't want to bring a whole big long list of grievances into an interview like that. There's no way to make that positive.
That's right. Exactly right.
And it may seem obvious to me, but I like the question, what are the risks of saying I've been getting calls if you haven't actually been getting calls?
Yes. So I like that you're bringing that point up as well. Usually folks are getting those calls. That's where their dissatisfaction comes from.
Oh, I see.
I'm kind of making that leap, right? That
Sure.
The person has been hearing, or you could also say it's based on research that you've done, places like salary.com, making sure they're regionally specific so that they're more meaningful, is also important. And sometimes what happens, companies hate this, but sometimes employees understand or learn what their coworkers are making, what their manager makes. That can provide you with some leverage as well.
Right. So let's say someone's thinking about that. Maybe they've started the conversation. Maybe they have, and it's not necessarily going that well. And they're thinking about, okay, maybe I should make a change. What kinds of things should they do to prepare before they actually leave where they are?
Yeah, this will seem so obvious, but nobody does it. You got to figure out what you want.
Okay.
It is deadly in the market to come across as an individual that what they know about what they want is, I don't want to be here.
Right.
But they don't know where they want to be. Yeah. And people don't realize it's very easy to sniff that out from a recruiting standpoint. You can see who is in our business, we call it the running from or running to. An employer wants to hire somebody who's running towards them. I want to work here. I'm very energized about what you do, and I want to contribute. versus somebody that's just dissatisfied with their current situation, and that's why they're looking. So figuring out what you want to do in terms of what job function, what industry, what geography, being very specific is critical.
Yeah, and that's just that's what was just occurring to me as you were saying that is, I'm assuming that when you say what you want is not, I want this much money per year,
That's right.
There's something beyond that.
That's right. And if you don't figure out what you want, I love being able to share this pet peeve, if you will, with your audience. When it comes to applications, applying for things, oftentimes when it's very easy, right? We see jobs all the time. They're out there. Oh my gosh, it's so easy to apply. It's easy for everyone to apply. As a recruiter, I'm telling you, 95% of the resumes that I receive are from people that have absolutely no business applying for that role. They have next to nothing.
Oh, okay.
What happens in that job seeker's mind is they say the sentence, hey, you never know. You never know. So just, you do know, I do know. You're
right.
You're not going to be called. And then you start getting what happens to the job seekers. They start getting very disillusioned. They're very angry about all these applications that they have put in without any reply back. And it really is because of that kind of a ratio from that recruiter, be they internal or a third party recruiter like myself. It's amazing how many people really have no business applying. And why is that? If I got a chance to talk to each of those people,
sure.
I would bet you dollars to donuts, they can't tell me what they want to do.
Okay. And there's something else that sort of your comments bring to mind, and that's confusing activity with progress, right? that some people get frustrated because, well, I'm doing all these things, but do you ever ask people, well, what exactly is it that you're doing, and what would a what are some of the principles of having an effective job search? What are the productive things to do as opposed to just doing things?
Yeah, so the productive thing, number 1 through 10, is that figuring out what you want to do.
Okay.
Which is like seems like vacuous advice, because that's the problem to begin with, right? People don't understand that. I mentioned to you that I help people in the first third of their career figure that out, and you can do that on your own with some good assessments and reading books and just trying to get clear on that. But moving on with practical advice from there.
Well, before you do, let's
please.
explore that for a minute, because I could see some people thinking, okay, well, I know what I want to do, and then they give you a job title. But my suspicion, based on the things you're saying, is that when you say what you want to do, you're talking about more than that.
Interestingly, yes and no. A job title is a terrific level of focus. That is what I try to drive people to. What function, industry, geography? You might as well work on plan A before you denigrate to plan B and C, right? Just like kind of whatever's open or out there.
Right.
So if somebody knows that what they want to do is to be I'm talking about, like I say, an early millennial, they want to be a financial analyst in the oil and gas industry in Texas. If that person has that level of clarity, you now have a project that you can execute. I'm going to see who are the employers in Texas in oil and gas.
Okay.
And then I'm going to try to network with anybody that I know that's in Texas, anybody that I know that's in the oil and gas industry, anybody that I know that's a financial analyst in that industry. And through tools like LinkedIn, you'll think you don't know anybody. There's probably 10 people in that menu of ideas I just gave you that you'd find to get yourself going.
Okay.
So important.
And what I was thinking was, you could say, I really want to be a senior developer, or something like that. Or you could say, I really want to be working on these kinds of projects, or, that this kind of application really excites me, or, I want to contribute to a company in this way. That's more what I was talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, to what extent do you get into that kind of thing, or really, are you better just tailoring your pitch to the position that someone has, or maybe advertising?
Yeah. So what you're getting at is part of that industry focus,
Okay.
right? So figuring out an industry you're interested in then leads you to a bucket of companies that are likely to have those kinds of developer projects, for example.
Oh, I see.
Being specific allows you to take action. And when I say taking action, I mean talking to people who know more than you do in those companies, in that industry. If you don't clarify your thinking down to that level, the only thing you can do is apply to stuff, which is very passive. And then you're back to that disillusionment and anger cycle.
Okay. Interesting. So let me ask you a couple of nuts and bolts things. I just saw this morning, popped up on my newsfeed someplace, video resumes. What do you think?
Yeah, that's I'll be the old-fashioned dragging my feet into that, because I'm sure we fast forward, we'll be in that world. Personally, I prefer to take visual out of it, to make sure that I am being as fair and open-minded to the skills and experience of an individual. So my first conversation when I'm on the hiring side, I much prefer it to be on phone and taking that element out of it, because not everybody's going to come across the same way.
Okay.
There's a world of introverts and extroverts, even that idea of speech making. We'd all rather be in a pit of snakes than making speeches. It feels a lot like that. So let's let more people at least come up on plane. And I think that first pass without visual is really the most fair.
Yeah, well, and now that you say that, I will add something. As a professional speaker, I can also tell you that a lot of people who think they're great on camera are not necessarily that great on camera. So I guess now that you say that, I guess you could actually sort of undermine yourself if you don't have the right coaching on it, at least.
And I would add, Stephen, that from a recruiter standpoint, remember I told you about that 95% that are wholly unqualified, to have to sift through that visually, where I want to get right to like the certain things I'm looking for, right? Before moving forward. So it can make it harder, not easier, to separate people that are very well suited from a role versus people who aren't, more time consuming. So that's why I wonder, will it really catch on?
Right.
Like I said, it could be because I'm old fashioned, but there really are some issues with it that are important.
Yeah. And if this is getting too detailed, we can just move on. But as we're talking about it, so what is the function of a resume? Because I'm sort of led to believe that some people put more weight on the resume than maybe is appropriate. So, how carefully should people, how much effort should people spend on resumes, and what are some of the big mistakes that people make on resumes when they're looking for a job?
Yeah, there's still a very important, and it's the resume. What's the purpose of a resume is to get you an interview. So if you are going the passive applying route, I would rather people are doing the networking thing, the resumes leave behind. That's ideal. Ideal. But to open up the most opportunities possible, you want your resume to be as good as possible, because there will be times that you are using it to just be, that's the first intro going in. And the number one piece of advice I'd have for anyone creating a resume is what we're looking for is proof. A listing of skills doesn't mean anything, because perhaps you have them, maybe you don't. Maybe you're the best the world's ever seen at that. Maybe you're the worst. What will show me are some bullets that tell me how you've used that skill to some sort of of accomplishment, purpose for the former employers that you've had. And that's the part that's hard. It's time consuming, because you have to figure out what was that, and you have to get it down into concise words. What it will do for you, in addition, though, Stephen, is it can avoid insanely painful interviews, because you don't want to be thinking that through for the first time when you're being interviewed. Tell me about your most proud professional accomplishment, and then you just kind of
right. Sure, I can see that. Yeah, well, that's interesting. And it's interesting. You've mentioned it now a couple times. So you talk about, I'm going to bring my son into this a couple times, because he recently went through this, and he's in that cohort. And he was talking about applying for a lot of jobs, and it's kind of now it's, I mean, I haven't applied for a job in a long time, so I don't know. But it's kind of like he was going to websites and just putting in his information and waiting to hear. And you were talking about networking. And so can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I'm not sure that we explored that really quite enough.
Yeah, that really is the plan A methodology for anyone's job search. So this would be the advice that I would give, and do give my closest loved ones. It's what I would do if I were doing it tomorrow. I dislike the word networking. It carries with it a connotation of being false, using people, and so on. So when I'm talking about networking for your job search, it's really what you have done as a person on this planet, likely since you were old enough to talk, meaning you have a question and you know someone that knows more than you do about it, right? I've got this squeaky noise in my brakes. I'm not going to ask anybody. I'm not just going to broadcast that. There's like one person I'm going to call, and I'm going to be able to advance the ball of what I was looking for. So in job search, it is by being very purposeful about what function, industry, geography, and coming up with that list of companies that make sense to you. You have no idea if they're hiring, but those are the companies that you should be focusing on. And then trying to have conversations with people in those organizations about the kind of department that you would be seeking, be it the software development department, or it is marketing, or it's finance or sales. You want to find out, how do you guys do that? How is your finance department organized? Where do you have a hard time filling positions when they come open? You just a series of progressive questions with somebody that's working there is what can fast track you into learning about a position that's open or coming open. And all of a sudden you're just on that interview list, as opposed to being one of 300 applicants and hoping that your stuff ever even got looked at.
Right. Interesting. That's really interesting. So I mentioned my son. So my son was laid off Disney when the pandemic started, as were 70,000 of his closest and dearest friends. And eventually he was laid off because the traffic didn't come back and they had to lay off tens of thousands of people. And so he was looking for, he got a temporary job, and then he was looking for something that was more equivalent to what he was doing before. And he looked for a bunch of months. I mean, he was really kind of frustrated because, nobody was hiring. It was a pandemic. And so we went through a lot of that. And eventually, this is like now after 5 or 6 months, he finally got an offer. And he said, but I could see that it's at the lower end of the band and it's not as much as I was making before. So I'm going to counteroffer. And I thought, okay, pretty gutsy, but whatever. And he came back with, with a bunch of terms, right? A significantly different income and a bunch of different things. And their response was, okay. And so, what, as people are looking, if they're, especially if they're not working where they were before, so now they really need to find a job. What kinds of things can they negotiate, and what kinds of things should they keep in mind when they start getting offers?
Yeah, a couple tips on that. So the negotiation begins with the very first interaction between employee and employer. Resume going in, right? Resume is well written. There's great accomplishments. That person's starting to get leverage. They perform well in the interviews. They are prepared. They've done their research. They've got great questions. Their stock continues to go up. Being very cautious during those interviews to not say things that can hurt your negotiations later. Sometimes job changers will say, hey, I know I won't make what I was making at X, but
right.
And I saw your eyes, right? I can't tell you how many people say that. You
Really?
don't know.
No kidding.
Oh, yes. And that got said early on in the process. Maybe it got said to the friend that put you in contact with somebody in the company. And sometimes that information trails along. So you have to be very cautious. But the other tip, so watching what you're saying as you're going forward, the other tip, and then I want to make sure that I'm answering your question, but the other tip or principle is you have absolutely no leverage until an offer is made to you. So focusing on negotiating, be it, you don't want to travel, or you want to work from home, or you're looking for X dollars, all that does by you bringing that up early is a chance for you to get kicked off the dance floor.
Okay.
So, having more interview practice, continuing on in the process. If you find that there's a terrible mismatch at the end, it was still an amazing use of your time, best use of your time ever. Because what can happen, and I've seen it many times, is as the person falls in love with you, employer falls in love with this person, their leverage goes up. Offer is made.
Okay.
And then what happens is a company might change the job. They might add more responsibilities. They might have learned somewhere along the way, you really aren't right for this job. You're right for this other job over here. So you don't know what might happen. So your job is to stay on the dance floor. So you stay away from all of those salary, benefits, travel, stay away from all of that. It is what it is. Your right to try to change or alter that will only come if the offer's made and they fall in love. Now you've got some power.
Okay. So that's great advice. And so now they've fallen in love with you and they've made you an offer, and what kinds of things can or should you negotiate?
Yes. So that also is dependent on where one is in one's career, right? In the beginning, you're just trying to negotiate a little more salary. As you move forward, if you are mid-career, for example, something that you could try to negotiate is a severance package, which might sound crazy, right? That sounds like you have no faith or confidence in yourself. But what happens is let's say you had 10 years of experience in company A where you're leaving. And if company A were bought out tomorrow, you would have gotten 2 weeks per year of service, or you would have gotten 6 weeks severance, something like that. When you're starting over again somewhere else, it's kind of zero unless you ask about it. And so the way one would negotiate for something touchy like that is to say, this is a concern that I have, not about my own ability or my satisfaction with the organization. I expect that that's all going to go very well, but you and I don't know. This company could be bought out tomorrow, and walking away without any kind of a bridge to my next employment is very concerning to me. And then you use language like, would the company consider? Not would you, would the company consider offering? And you'd be very specific. Other things you can negotiate that are very important to people, definitely early on and later throughout the continuum, is vacation time. And that one is you'd think it would be easy, but if you want 4 weeks and the person you report to in the new company has got 5 years experience and they only get 3, it's an issue. So if 4 weeks is really important to you, one of the things you can say is that, you would be very open to taking a week without pay if the company would allow for 4 weeks. And of course, you don't take vacation when the company needs you. You've got a track record of that, right? Mm-hmm. Doing it in the right order. So there's just little nuances like that one can think through.
Interesting. Yeah, that severance idea is very interesting. Not one I would have thought of.
Right.
So a very different twist than when Stephen Covey said, "Begin with the end in mind."
Right. Right.
That's
right.
That's very interesting. Just generally, any other principles people should keep in mind if they're thinking about making a change, and what they should be considering before they make a leap someplace?
Yeah, I always give the advice to not make that leap until you have found that next branch that you're going to land on. So even if you have that nest egg, unless you have something that is really impacting your health, your mental health to a great degree, something you're uncomfortable with, much better for you to quietly conduct your job search while employed. And the stuff that you can be doing now is that figuring out, what is it that I want? What is closer to the mark for me? What's important to me out of the world of work? So identifying that, and then thinking about, well, okay, which geography, which industries, which employers, and then you can start doing that networking while you're employed and being planful. So my fear now is, again, if people are just jumping on the bandwagon, jumping on the Great Resignation bandwagon, is everybody won't have the same reception. Everybody won't have the same experience. And I've seen it many times where as you move along in your career and you're more experienced, you're more advanced, you've got that higher salary, you can wake up and find that, like, wow, it's been like 11 months.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That can and does happen. And so it always makes me sad when people change their point of view to say, well, what are you looking to do? Anything at this point. Right. People say that during their networking, right? So much safer to go from one branch to the next without that gap in between, if you can make that happen for yourself.
Interesting. Well, Patty, there's a lot of great stuff in here. I really appreciate this. I know a lot of our listeners will really appreciate it. And obviously there's a lot to this, especially for people who are moving into mid-career and not just looking for a first job, but looking to meaningfully advance their career. So if people wanted help with that kind of thing, where can they find you?
Yes, so it's a Clarity Recruiting and Career Management, and I would just email me, Patty, Patty at Clarity, and then it's racm.com, which stands for Recruiting and Career Management. So yeah, I'd be pleased to hear from you.
Great, Patty, and we'll put the website and things in our show notes and things so that people can find you. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing all this with our listeners.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks for great, well-considered questions.